I'm Jennifer Moeller. I'm the costume designer for seasons 2 and 3 of Dickinson.
One of the most striking elements of the show is probably the way that the contemporary dialogue and the soundtrack juxtapose with very highly researched, very authentic period finishes, both for the sets and the costumes. So how did you approach your design process, and what were some of the most useful resources for you while you were doing that research?
I feel like when the viewer sees the show, I want them to walk away thinking that they've seen sort of real and accurate clothing, which I think from what you're saying, we've sort of done, which is exciting. But I do take a fair number of liberties when I'm putting things together, because I do want things to sort of appeal to the contemporary eye. So I often like simplify things or a little bit, or in the case of this last season, like the trims can be a little heavy. So I definitely lighten things up a little bit. But again, the goal is to make them feel like real clothes. And to do that, I always start with what's real. What was there? What did they really wear? What were the underpinnings like? You have to start from the inside out. And if you don't get that underwear right, then the dress doesn't sit properly. So we do sort of start with what's real. And to do that, I did a number of things. One is, this is a time when photography in America really starts to take off, right? There's the invention of the daguerreotype, which is a photograph process which was a little more accessible. More people were able to have photographs taken, not just the wealthy. So there's an amazing source right there of real people wearing real clothes. We purchase real antique clothing that we sort of open up and look on the inside and see how are the seams done, and how are the closure, what kind of closures do they use, and we reference those for pattern pieces, taking patterns from them. I definitely came and checked out the museum. I don't know, sort of commune with Emily's spirit a little bit. But then I did go over to historic Deerfield. They have a number of pieces there on display, real clothes from menswear and women's wear. And I did spend some time looking at that. And in their collection, they have an online collection. So I looked there some just to sort of get an idea of what was happening in Western Massachusetts at the time. Final thing, and this really sort of came more into play in season 2, is I looked at a lot of the fashion plates from Godey's ladies book, which was, I think it was like the most popular magazine just before the Civil War. It was a ladies magazine. And those were those fashion plates coming from Europe. A lot of them were the things that I looked at a lot for Sue's looks in season 2.
All that research that you did, and ultimately the designs that you made, what were your hopes for the way that wardrobe would help to tell the story that the show is telling?
A lot of decisions, almost every decision is always driven by what's going to push the story forward and what's going to tell us what we need to learn about the characters. And for Dickinson, and for each episode, I always start with the poem that's attached to the episode. Every episode has a particular poem of Emily's. I'm gonna start there, and then I start with Emily, what Emily's wearing. I use this example quite a bit because I think it's the most clear, but I often will try to tie what she's wearing to that poem. For example, in season 2, there's the Daisy follows soft the sun. And we wanted to find something that really popped against all that green, but also something that referenced that poem. So she ended up wearing this sort of yellow floral. So I always start there with the poem and with Emily, and then I sort of build the rest of the world around her. Emily takes a different approach to her work every season. Season 1, she's trying to figure out if she should be a poet. Season 2, she's struggling with fame. Season 3, she's trying to find her place, what her place is in the world, and what her poems mean in the context of the Civil War. So I'm always trying to show her sort of maturing from season to season. And then from season to season, there's characters that have sort of pretty significant changes. Sue, from season 1 to season 2, she goes from this orphan with only a couple of black dresses to this, glamorous socialite who never wears the same thing twice. And for from season 2 to 3 for Austin, he goes from good old Austin to sort of drunk, alcoholic, troubled playboy Austin.
Well, I imagine it is very difficult to choose when you have produced 3 seasons worth of beautiful designs. But do you have sort of a favorite costume moment from the show?
I will say that this last season 3, has a bunch of things that are have been really memorable and fun, particularly with Emily. like the fourth episode has her in this sort of blue-gray, almost chambray dress. And when she goes into her like fantasy life, fantasy of being in the Civil War hospital, it switches to this very vibrant blue, which was just the opposite side of the fabric. The fabric has two different sides. And that was a sort of favorite moment. In the fifth episode, she's got this really beautiful embroidered jacket ensemble that she wears to the craft quilting bazaar. Knew that that room was going to be full with all these patterns and colors, and there's a lot of brown in those quilts. So I wanted something that was really going to stand out. And so we put her in a solid and in this really beautiful green. So that's a favorite. And then of course at the end of the season, I think I can talk about this because it is in the trailer for the Emily's famous white dress makes an appearance in the final episode of the series, and that was a real joy to put together. And that was something that started from my very first visit to the homestead. Jane and I talked about clothes, and she said the only thing we have is this replica of the famous white dress, right? So that there was something that you guys had. It starts with me coming to the museum and seeing the white dress, being really moved by it, but thinking it was never going to be part of the show. And then I got the script for the final episode and was really excited to see that it was going to finally make an appearance. So I immediately called Jane and I said, "What can you tell me about the dress?" And I guess that the replica was made prior to Jane's tenure at the museum, right? I think for a period of time, the real dress was on loan from, I think, the Amherst Historical Society, right? And it was on display. And then I think smartly was taken off display and stored in a safer way. And a replica was made. And we found that there was a woman commissioned to take the pattern off of the dress, but we were able to reach out to her, and she provided us with the pattern that she had taken from the dress. And then we also reached out to this company in England that had been commissioned to make a replica to weave a replica of the fabric and the trim. And so this, I can't take credit for any of this because Jonathan Nipsher, who is the made-to-order assistant on the show, he's the one responsible for all of the things that we build. He really sort of took over and did all this investigating. And so we got the pattern, and then we reached out to the company in England, and lo and behold, they had about 8 yards left. And I think this was like 20 years ago that this all happened in like the 90s, and they still had about 8 yards squirreled away. But we weren't sure that 8 yards was going to be enough. Typically we buy about 10 to 12 yards for a dress, but this was a later period and the silhouette was a little slimmer. So we thought it might work, so pass up. So we bought it, we had it sent over. We also tried to get the trim that was replicated, but that company in New Jersey has since gone out of business. So we weren't able to do that. So we knew we had to find some substitutes for that. And luckily we were able to find something very close locally. The fabric came, and the amazing tailor shop that we have on Dickinson, who makes all the clothes for Emily and the family, was able to eke it out. And so what you see on camera is something that's as close as we could have possibly gotten to the real dress, much because of the help of the Emily Dickinson Museum. So thank you.
The museum have been so incredibly fortunate to have received hundreds of costume pieces from the show, which are now in our possession at the museum. So just this week, we took 3 of those costumes and mounted them to see the full effect of the garments on the human form. And these are probably 3 of my favorite pieces.
Start with the one that's for Emily, the one in the middle, the white dress. So that one is from season 2. It's the one where she finally meets the real Frasier. And that sort of ghost that's been haunting her through the season. She sort of figures out who that person is. So it was very much inspired by my trips to the homestead. Every time I go, I spend some time out there in that garden. I spend time with the herbarium, which I think is so special. Her love of nature and flowers and has always sort of spoken to me. So we use a lot of florals in the show, especially for her. And this one I just loved because it gets white, which is sort of that reference to her famous white dress. And it has these sort of ghostly flowers, fun to think about in relation to the ghost of Frasier. And also it comes at this time in the season where, season 3 is all about her sort of having confidence as a writer and then like trying to figure out whether she should seek fame or not. And it comes in a sort of vulnerable time for her in this series. The blue-green plaid is something that Sue wore to her sort of the intellectual party was one of her salons where she's trying to seem sort of smart and bookish. I think she even put some glasses on as part of that. What I love about this piece is that, this time is time when, sort of ensembles or suits or dresses that had several different pieces that you could wear in different combinations started to come into play. Sometimes you would have one skirt, but a couple of different bodices. You might have a day bodice and something that felt a little more evening that you could pair with that same skirt. And in this case, there's a little sleeveless vest that you could wear with that little jacket. And then the sleeves, the little undersleeves, or even a separate piece. And those were designed to be easily removable and so that they could be laundered. So I love this piece because it comes from a real piece of research too. And it also has a sort of like military theme running through it, which comes, if I'm not mistaken, from sort of Zouave military. So the Zouave soldiers that are, I think, coming out of French North Africa, and they were and Turkey. I think there's some like the Turkish inspirations in their clothes, and that sort of inspired women's wear in the 50s. And that last piece is one of my favorites, and that's a dress that Betty wears to the quilt bazaar in season 3. Betty has a pretty big role in season 3, and she's the dressmaker of the town. And so everything about her needed to just be impeccably tailored and fit really beautifully. And the fabric is sort of big and bold, which is sort of something that happens in this period. The skirts get bigger and there's a lot of real estate to cover. And so you can have these sort of bigger patterns to fill in that space. And then one of the things that they did a lot was use bits and pieces of the fabric for decorative elements. So in this case, the bows on her sleeves and at the neck are taken from, certain part of the plaid that was then put together to make these little bows. So it just felt like the perfect dress for a dressmaker going to sort of show her art. I have to also credit the unbelievably talented tailors who make these clothes. I mean, I am just a part of the equation. I sort of collect a bunch of things and throw them in the air, and they make these amazing things, which over and over again exceed my expectations. And that's really rare. I can't say enough about how amazing they are. I have this amazing team that includes a bunch of assistant designers who are helping create the designs. There's people running out to shop the fabrics and the trims. There's a whole team that fits background. There's a lot of background in the show, and then there's the amazing wardrobe crew who make sure everything is beautifully prepared, and they're watching for continuity to make sure everything is just perfect.
So our hope is that one day in the not too distant future, after the museum reopens, that we will ultimately be able to produce an exhibition with you where these incredible costumes are mounted within the houses at the homestead and the evergreens that comprise the museum. So I just would love to hear you speak about what that would feel like to you to see your work in these original spaces that were, occupied by the Dickinson family, by these characters who you spent so much time with.
The first, to have them have another life after the end of the show is really exciting and special. And then to have that life be at the place where it all kind of started is pretty magical. I mentioned that I've made several trips up there, and it really informed so much all of the work. And so to have these beautiful things that we've labored so intensely over 3 years come back to have another life at the museum is really sort of magical. I can't wait.